comments. If you have trouble commenting, make sure that you are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. So as you settle in, I'd like to tell you a little bit about TRF and outline a little of what you can expect from today's event. TRF is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to supporting and growing a community of clinicians, researchers, educators, and people whose lives are affected by trauma. Our book club is currently entering its second year, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. Our growing team has been continually learning how to create the best experience for both panelists and our streaming audience. In this series, we invite two new moderators to facilitate this discussion. I'd like to welcome our moderators, Achra Tarfa and Ronnie Ang. Today's session is the second episode of the 6-part series. Each week brings together as many as 15 panelists to discuss The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. During the final episode on Thursday, March 30th, the author will join our conversation for a live Q&A session, and I know you won't want to miss that. All right. We invite our virtual community to participate in this discussion. Feel free to use the YouTube chat function to share your comments throughout this discussion. Our team at TRF are all tuning in with you, and we'll be sharing some comments after each discussion question. So again, if you have trouble commenting, make sure that you are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. All right, so we'll be sharing information about each panelist as they respond to their first question. Panelists are invited to apply from anywhere in the world and from every background. We truly welcome voices representing a diversity of experiences and thoughts. If you have any interest in participating as a panelist during episodes 3 through 5, we will provide the application at the end of this discussion in the YouTube chat. We'll select panelists for our final episode from the list of panelists who participated in the first 5 episodes. So to help ground us in this conversation, we're happy to offer a study guide as a companion to your reading. Please download the study guide from the link in the chat. Also, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that time, attention, and care. I'm excited to introduce our TRF team that makes this production possible. Pat, our media manager, Connor, our media specialist, Laura, our programs manager, myself, and my colleague and amazing partner in this program, Liz, each of us are program specialists at the Trauma Research Foundation. And now to introduce our book club moderators, Ronnie Ang and Achra Tarfa. So our first moderator, Achra Tarfa, is a certified trauma recovery coach supervisory level with the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches. She's a board member of PATH, a program to recover from addiction and its underlying trauma utilizing an internal family systems informed approach. As a trauma survivor herself, Achra founded Compassionate Coaching for Complex Trauma to support other survivors and serves as a 2-term elected district supervisor where she brings a self-led trauma-informed voice to local policy. She enjoys spending time eating the food of her mother's country, Thailand, and is always up for an adventure. Our second moderator, Ronnie Ang, is an EMDR and expressive arts play therapist, a group facilitator certified by the Trauma Healing Institute and the president-elect of the American Counseling Association in New York. He's a community advocate on the board of a 501c3 nonprofit focusing on the inner city, where his mission is to empower marginalized children against intergenerational and racial trauma, as well as internalized oppression and vicarious trauma. He has also lived on 3 continents and is often invited to speak on the biopsychosocial impact of spiritual health and vice versa by local leadership around the world. Currently, Ronnie is writing a PhD dissertation on purpose-filled worldviews and other post-traumatic growth factors that strengthen the resiliency and hardiness for military families and international workers with third culture kids in dangerous environments. Thank you both for being here in support of this community, Achra and Ronnie. So today we will discuss part 2. This is Your Brain on Trauma from The Body Keeps the Score. In chapters 4 through 6 of the book, we learn about how trauma can lead people to feel unsafe in their own bodies by trapping them in their reptilian brain. Take it away, Ronnie and Achra.
Thank you for that, Emma. Wonderful introduction, and we welcome everybody here, panelists, among us, as well as the participants in YouTube. To begin with, we want to ground everybody with a few wellness recommendations. And, first off, we want to make sure that everybody is aware that some of these topics that we're discussing today will be difficult. They'll be challenging to work through if you've been alive for any number of years, right? So please feel free to take a pause if you need, and just really take care of yourself. Right? Just make sure that you're here and every part of you feels safe, because self-care is very important. And anytime, we just recommend that you do any number of grounding techniques. Just take a pause, get a drink of water, stretch, do some deep breathing, even just name your senses and do everything you can to just relax into the present moment. So with that in mind, please let's introduce the first question by Atra. Atra?
Thanks, Ronnie. So with the first question, I'm going to, can I have the next slide on that? Thank you. So the first question is chapter 4, question 1. What is the difference between top-down and bottom-up regulation? Who would like to take this question first? I'll go ahead. Anuradhika, I see your hand.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. First of all, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Welcome.
Yeah, it was just amazing reading about these two, the top down and the bottom up. For me, I just realized that I always use bottom up in my own life, because bottom up is all about, I feel like it's like getting in touch with the sensations, like what are you feeling? Like right now I can feel my heart thumping, and it's like, wow, it's like really thumping in my chest, and it's like I'm nervous here, and oh my gosh. And it's about just taking a deep breath and just allowing yourself to just be with that nervousness. And so for me it was really nice to feel that. With the top up, I felt my understanding of it was it's much more using your experience, your knowledge, prior expectations of stuff. And for me, it was kind of like drawing from experience, but also easy to get a little cerebral with it. And so a little bit out of my body. And so I love the idea of having these two terms to really work with. Like, oh, I notice I'm going top down now. Oh, I'm noticing, I'm going bottom up, which is working for me right now in this moment.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the distinguish between the two and the understanding on how to effectively treat trauma. We need to bring that bottom up perspective into that as well, as he talks about in the book. I see Carol is next.
Thanks. I'm also really pleased to be here. Similarly, I think of top down as, like probably many of us do, as our executive functions. I'm dominated by top down. That's been how I've been all my life, sometimes to my detriment. And I think of bottom up as is described in the book, as the things that are coming from our reptilian brain, over which we have almost no control. We have some, and our limbic system. The clarifying example in my life was it wasn't a near drowning experience. I just thought it was a near drowning experience. I panicked during some scuba diving lessons quite a few years ago. And I have never gone offline like that in my entire life. I wasn't words and I wasn't thought. I was just, I wouldn't even call it feeling. I was urges. I would have killed small children to get out of the water. I had one drive, and that was survival. And that was a really big lesson for me about how powerful that part of our brain is. And it has only one mission, and that's to survival. If you take that into working with people who've had traumatic events or traumatic lives, it puts a whole new meaning on a whole new perspective on the proper location of top-down talk approaches versus other ones that have become so much more understood in the last 5, 10, or 15 years. Thanks.
Thank you for contributing to that. You know, he does talk about that, the top down, more of an insight, sort of cognition, sort of reasoning, neocortex, prefrontal. And just like you said, versus the emotional brain that's made up of that reptilian, mammalian aspects of us, those that bottom up, those feelings, right, that we sense in our body. That's some sensory feeling. Let me go ahead and see. I think we've got a comment over there in YouTube. Ronnie, can you go ahead and let us know what's going on in YouTube, and then we'll take Alyssa for the last answer to this question.
Yeah, we definitely have a good comment here from Arter. Arter says, something I'm continually working on is mindfulness of the physiological sensations I experience. When I'm nervous, frustrated, etc., I believe up until recently, my past responses have been bottom up too. So someone who does appreciate the bottom up perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comment. Thanks, Ronnie. Alyssa, we'll go to you for the last answer to this question. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So the way I have come, I've worked a lot. I live a lot in the headspace too. And kind of the last key to my healing journey was really digging into the bottom up. I really relate to the dissociation from the body for a lot of years. But the way we experience life is the neurophysiology of it. The body experiences it. And then the mind then tries to categorize and organize it. And so the way I've come to kind of think of the top down, it's the cognitive process. It's the labels. Oh, it's hot. I'm sweaty, this and that. Where the bottom up is before there's words. It's kind of sometimes where you play with the words. It feels heavy. No, it feels sticky. Like there aren't always words that come with that. And then as far as trauma, it's the inability. There's a breaking apart, and he highlights the brain and stuff like that. But that fragmentation is what kind of it doesn't allow the hippocampus to then label, oh, this is this is that, and that kind of disrupts the whole process. And then as far as like treating trauma with the top down regulation and bottom down regulation, one of the best visuals I've seen for trauma is the iceberg. And we have all these manifestations of like the outward that we can talk through. But then below is what the body's keeping score of. It's all of those experiences that we haven't completed. And we're seeing now, and it's so amazing that the science is catching up, that like we can't talk our way back to that. We have to get the body back there. And that's what we can even learn from flashbacks, is there are ways to get us back into the body, and then we can begin to fix that process.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Throughout the book, he has so many examples of how people have done that in his observations, and we'll get to a bit of that as we go on with the question. Thank you all for answering that. I'll hand it over to Ronnie for the next question. Ronnie, you're up.
Thank you so much, Ashra. And for question number 2, we have, how might we utilize mirror neurons to facilitate interactions with individuals who are dysregulated or are experiencing overwhelming emotions? So the first panelist we have here is Zita. Zita?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I am autistic. And so reading this book from the perspective of a neurodivergent mind and starting to dig into what that is, I'm also the parent of a non-speaking autistic child. And that experience is really fascinating because we put a lot, culturally speaking, on the use of words. But when you're dealing with a nonverbal child, it really does, I think, really contextualize that mirror neuron and that neurological communication that happens in our neuroceptive process, right? And so when safety is compromised in our body, and our internal, our top-down mechanism, our bottoms-up mechanisms are kind of overfiring, the top-down is still working synchronized in a synchronized fashion, assessing what's going on and taking in that information and trying to see if that information on the outside matches the inside process. So as it's observing my neurological state, coming into the sensation that, well, mom is not having this panicked response. Mom is very calm and she's using calm words and engaging with me in a calm way. And that doesn't match what's happening inside. And I think sometimes we forget about the speed issue of those two systems. One happens very fast and the other is just a little bit behind, but it's still functional, right? And we can really access both if we can slow the system down enough for the cognitive processes to catch on and check for that matching.
Wow, thank you so much for that comment, Sita. I actually, that's a special place in my heart because I began my career working with autistic children in the early childhood years, 2, 3, 4 years of age. And it's exactly what you were describing, because when they are withdrawn into their own psyches, it's very difficult to just talk them out of it, especially when they're at that age. I mean, you could even have a neurotypical child at 2 years old and they'll be throwing the tantrums. They'll, the terrible twos are terrible twos for a reason, right? So being able to show them how to respond in a measured way and be emotionally regulated, that provides the basis for synchronicity and reciprocity in any kind of activity, really provides a basis for their development overall. So thank you for providing that neurodiverse experience. And for the next panelist, we have Anuradhika.
Yeah, I loved what you were saying. And for me, I think it just, the mirroring just offers so much safety if we ourselves are regulated, right? It's like, so long as we are safe and we are centered and we are calm, I think just being present and your own presence of that calmness, it's like, just breathing together, it tends to just make the person breathe differently. And the minute they start breathing differently, their heart rate comes down, their whole body starts to kind of loosen. And I know it wasn't mentioned in the book, but interestingly, it works the same way with dogs. You can kind of get dogs to mirror. If you mirror a dog, he or she will start calming down as well. And so I think it's a really nice way of providing safety. It's a really nice way of providing that feeling of being heard and seen, right? That absolute presence that you bring in when you're thinking of doing any kind of mirroring. You have to be present yourself, which means the person understands that you're present there for them, and it creates this bond. And what the author was talking about, the whole social interaction, then can start taking place. It's the safety for social interactions.
I love that concept of modeling it out. And even when I work with my own child, I have kids who are young, and when they were about 2 years old, I would, just hold out my hand and I'm like, one, or actually I would say it in Swahili because teaching her Swahili, and it's like moja, mbili, and she would put her thumb next to mine, and it would really be a mirror because we'd be like, tatu, ne, tano. And then she would learn a different language, so it's top down, but also from the bottom up as well, and just mirroring exactly what I was doing, the same way I was saying it, same way I was breathing, and it was just a very full orbed experience. So that's a wonderful comment. Thank you for that. So for the next panelist, we do have Christine. Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
We must all be on the same wavelength there, because I'm going to piggyback right off of that. I was thinking with my clients, the more I sit in self-energy and just hold the presence, one thing is it models behavior that a lot of clients may not have seen before in their life. of being regulated and peace and calm. And with us being social creatures, we have that automatic instinct to then mirror that back. So as they're, more agitated and emotional surge, what I call, and I sit there and reflect back with attentive listening and, oh, that must be really tough. You must be feeling really frustrated about that, and helping them name their emotions also just brings them down to then mirror that back. And like you were saying too, it models that action, that behavior that then gives them that experience, which then, of course, when they fire together, when the neurons fire together, they wire together. So even just holding that space in the therapy room gives them that new experience that then they begin to build off of. Fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a wonderful discussion. And I want to include some of the comments that have been coming in from YouTube because that's just been, there's actually a question there that's been posed by Sheila Chan. And Atra, do you want to read that out?
Sure. I saw that too, and I was curious if the panel would like to address this question. How would quadriplegics be able to use the recommended rhythmic activities since many can't walk, dance, or in some cases sing? How would they connect with somatic self? Thank you, Sheila. Does anyone want to maybe think about that question as well and incorporate that into our discussion today? What a great question. I'll pass it back to you, Ronnie.
Self-regulation exercises that that can be done really for anybody who's not even just quadriplegics, but even when you think about exercises that people talk about when you do in a hotel room, in a limited space, or if you live in New York and you live in a shoebox, how can you really get the full range of movements? But certainly for quadriplegics, it's a very different situation. So I don't know, Zita, do you have any comments about that?
I do. I work in exercise physiology. And so we work a lot in adaptive movement and with people who do have who have spinal conditions or traumatic brain injuries that can change a little bit of the sensory processing mechanisms. Some things that you can consider doing is using the vibration of music, right? So we've seen a lot, actually Stephen Porges that we discuss in chapter 6 has done a lot of research and work around acoustic stimulation of the vagus nerve and these kind of different mechanisms that we can use that can resonate the nervous system using multisensory, right? So it's not, you don't just regulate through the movements, you regulate through the autonomic nervous system's interpretation of information as it comes in. So often we will use hot cold on the skin, in the parts of the skin that are very sensory aware. And interestingly enough, one of the things that sometimes happens, even with people who don't have spinal or nervous system injuries or dysregulation, is that trauma can actually create a scrub of the nervous system. So you can lose perception of certain parts of your body where they either become hypersensitive to pain or hyposensitive, and they can't feel the same way. So using smell and sound and touch over the skin, engaging in visual imaging and talking through different scenarios can be very effective for evoking those same things. We actually use imaging in quadriplegics who used to be sport athletes to trigger the muscles firing and to keep the nervous system communicating as much as it can. And so every body is able to process even when that processing looks different.
That is so wonderful. It's a great description of what you can do. And a lot of people, when they think of bottom up, they think about actually movements, but sensations, interoception is actually quite a critical piece of that. So thank you for that, Zita. So let's hear from another panelist. Anna Radika, you have something to add?
I seem to be piggybacking off Zita a lot. I love what you said, Zita. I think, with Tibetan sound healing as well, right? It's like the vibration, the sound going in can also really help shift out of a state of anxiety or panic or just bringing in that calm and bringing in that relaxation and bringing in the letting go of the whatever's holding you tight and contracting your body. And I think too, just the soothingness of touch, right? Just having somebody else come and just touch your body somewhere immediately. I think it was in the book as well. It's that idea of being able to just feel safe, right? Of course, safe touch, but like just even on your head, it just feels so nice. It just allows your whole body to relax. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, and everybody check out the YouTube comments. There's certainly a number of things that were proposed by both Whitney and one of our panelists from last week actually has a lot of good suggestions as well. So hello to Adelita, who's out there and contributing to the YouTube comments. Well, let's move along to question 3 of chapter 4. Atra, would you like to take this?
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. So from the study guide, Kolk, he shares the story of Stan and Uta Lawrence. And they were the 13th car in an 87 car pileup. And Dr. Ruth Linnaeus performed fMRI scans on Stan and Uta to determine the best approaches for treatment for them. And she found very different responses. Stan's brain showed significantly more activation on the right side of the brain, and that depicted an amygdala overdrive. And then on the contrary, Uta's brain her scan showed decreased activation in almost every area of the brain. So she responded to the car accident in a vastly different way, even though she was sitting right next to her husband in the car. So for question 3, given that context, what might treatment look like for Stan and what might treatment look like for Uta? Who would like to take this question? There's some discussion that we just had in regards to polyvagal theory, right? And so that plays a part in this, and according to this chapter. Anna Radhika, I see your hand.
Thank you. I feel like I'm like jumping in constantly. I think for Uta, what would be her story kind of reminded me of Shelley's story a bit later. I think that was chapter 5, where she had disassociated, and it seems to me like Uta had just completely frozen. And I think that treatment for her might be much more, just hands-on, like maybe the same as Shelley, like massaging, just having her just feel like, okay, I think she used the word, she had numbed out, she felt numb when she was asked, and kind of just even taking that word and just saying to her, well, what does numb feel like? Right? Sometimes it's that simple. It's just easy for me to say I feel numb, but when you start asking me what does it feel like, then I'm back in my body. Then I'm going bottom up again, right? Then I'm like really in my body, feeling something. The numbness could be I feel empty. What does empty feel like? Or the numbness could be, oh, I just feel like this, whatever it might be. At least it's a starting point to start getting back into the body. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my dog barking, so I'm gonna hop off.
No worries. Your dog, we welcome dogs here. So that's completely okay. Zita, I see your hand.
Yeah, at the risk of over speaking, and I promise I'll be quiet when the hands come up. I live in Northern Alberta. And so in my mind, the frozen analogy comes up a lot. And I think that when we see numbness, it's that duck quietly on the lake, but really actively working underneath. Or in our work, we talk a lot about the frozen river, right? Just because a river is frozen on the outside doesn't mean that things aren't happening on the inside, right? And so there can be a lot of activation in the nervous system that is almost incapable of translating through because the threat is assessed as being so high. One of the ways of working with that, we talk a lot about helping the body to find physiological safety and find physiological grounding. But sometimes utilizing stress and utilizing big explosive movements and creating a joyful and safe experience around movement. I think it was in this chapter where he talked about sending his client to kickboxing, and I'm like, yes, go punch something, right? It's therapeutic to be able to physically place the big, not only the small. And I think that we emphasize a lot the calming and neurologically grounding activities like yoga, and I think that's really important. But there's also a tremendous value to teaching the body that feeling a high heart rate and feeling perspiration can be safe, can be joyful, can be exciting, and can be healing, right? And that's where there's a wide gamut of different things that feel good, and we can titrate those different experiences to expand our ability to tolerate physiological stress, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. When I first, in a former life, I was a speech language pathologist. And so I worked often in the beginning stages with neurodivergent, particularly autistic children, or children with autism. And we would have this term, gerund referencing. And anytime that, they looked at something and we looked at something, or I looked at something, we had to make this like explosive big deal about it to sort of kind of get that mobility going of like, oh, this is good. This is a good thing. And then it would reinforce that in my mirror neurons and back and forth. And so there's, there is room, right, for sort of those energetic sort of getting the person in that mobility. So it sounds like that would be more of right for Uda, as what you're sort of describing, is that sort of push and pull. And it reminded me of the story of the beach ball. Do you remember that story where he talks about, the guy that was really great with working with trauma survivors, and he would have the beach ball, and the person would sort of the kid would not be around or not really respond. And then he'd walk by accidentally and drop the beach ball, and then maybe push it a little. And then the kid would push it back. And then there'd be this sort of mobility back and forth and smiles on their faces. And so I think that's so true of sort of getting that mobility going that way. And those calming and, of course, breath, we've got that inhale and exhale, right? So we've got both going on, right? That sympathetic and parasympathetic activating. Thanks so much for your comments, Ida. Alyssa, I see your hand too. Oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry about that. So I just want to kind of piggyback on some of what Zita said. And yes, like I said that when I started incorporating the body into my healing process, like everything I'd been trying to talk myself out of just exploded. And for me, I would almost say treating both of them with body-based. Our study guide mentions that Stan would definitely benefit from that cognitive process too. But for people who just can't get out of their head, I have noticed that by elevating the body, elevating my heart rate, elevating my breathing rate, literally throwing my body into that hard reset, that recalibration that we see birds and animals, somatically shake off in the animal kingdom, there's more for me to tune into in my body. I can all of a sudden, you can't hear anything else because my heart's beating so much. I can really notice the sensation of the air hitting the sweat that I've accumulated on my brow. So yes, Zita, like, yes, transmute it, like move through it, both with the frozen aspect, get them moving. And then also, to allow, I also notice that I'm able to cognitively think better after I've elevated the body. It's clearer as well. So
yeah, I like that so much, incorporating both. And I think the emphasis, right, is understanding that for trauma survivors, there isn't just one sort of way. We have to incorporate this bottom up, have to, for trauma survivors. Absolutely 100%. Carol, I see your hand too. Are you there? Oh, I think she might be frozen. Well, let's go over to, oh, there she is, Carol. Can you hear us?
Back? Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we got you now.
I wanted to say something about the bottom-up approaches. We work almost exclusively with people with fairly advanced dementia. So you grow your brain from the bottom up, and dementia just takes it apart in reverse. So there's no talking rationally to people about anything. And you can activate them in a heartbeat, either because of the organic issues that go on with dementia or past traumas that resurface or were always there, but they manage them. And they're being taken care of by a workforce who have an unspoken but clearly deep experiences with their own personal traumas. And what I'm big on is things that are simple and safe. And the safest thing, we're trying experimenting with different sensory modulation kinds of things, but breathing, you can't beat it. It almost never causes a problem. And you don't have to teach it to the residents in the nursing homes, but you just have to teach it to the staff as a self management tool. And they will figure out by themselves, although now we tell them once we realize this, that they can go into a room and co-regulate the resident, and just with a good rhythmic, coherent breathing strategy. And why am I saying that? Because things like vibration and things like touch and things like restraint or any kind of constriction of movement, you don't have their histories a lot of the time, and it's so dangerous to them in terms of setting them off and causing them distress. So we stick pretty much with the simplest things we can find, things that upregulate the parasympathetic system, things that we hope are releasing oxytocin, and some of it would involve mirror neurons, but I'm not sure how well they work in people with advanced dementia. But the breathing works. We know the breathing works. It helps them regulate. And we're hoping that some of the pet-oriented things we do are also giving them a kick of oxytocin that will, if their systems are still working enough to do that. So just a comment on how important I think breathing is. I think it's the core bottom-up strategy that we should, in my work, we should always use first.
Yeah, I know breathing for me, I was actually in a training the other day in the meditation and I myself am a trauma survivor as well. And I had a part that's really resistant to that as one of the modalities, right? Breathing, especially if I'm in sympathetic mode because of whatever, maybe coming on a panel, never been doing this before sort of thing, or whatever that may be, right? And by the time just allowing it to land, and by the time the end of the breathing session was over, I was calmer and in a place of, oh, okay. So even if in the beginning we still feel, oh, there's that resistance, because for not everyone, it doesn't work for everyone. But if we allow it to land and let ourselves experience it, just our biology of the whole breathing in and out. I agree with you. I think it's extremely effective, extremely. I think a month ago, Dr. Bessel Kolk did for the TRF Foundation, did a whole breathing sort of exercise for one of the TRF Tuesdays, and it was wonderful. So check that out, viewers, if you haven't checked that out either. Ronnie, I saw your hand. Were there some YouTube comments out there?
Absolutely. The YouTube channel has a lot of good comments there. I did want to call out one by author. He had mentioned, I think the contrasting plan and treatment alone makes answering this difficult, especially because trauma is so complex. Since you was prone to dissociation, as someone who struggles with it but isn't therapy for it, I think talk therapy and mindfulness exercises might help. Of course, there's more to it and there's different approaches for everyone. But for me, it helps. So there's one person's view, mindfulness in addition to all the breathing that you're talking about. And yeah, a lot of people, good comments.
Yeah. I saw another comment there from Annie where she was talking about right before our book club, she had a client that had starting to panic over an elevated heart rate and forces. And turns out he was anxious about just getting a positive COVID test and was not feeling well. had him physically shake it off, stand and stretch, and then a good discussion ensued about his window capacity. He was able to then tolerate these normal bodily sensations. So, oh yeah, and oh, that's right, Annie. Yes, Annie has a golden doodle named Bess, after the author of this book. So that's, I forgot about that. That's true. So thanks, Annie, for that contribution of, yeah, so we can just even shake it off and get that going. I see a lot of head nods. I'm curious, Christine and Angela, I've seen you sort of nodding on this question a lot. And I was wondering if either one of you had anything that you would like to contribute and offer before I go to Zita. I see, who's going to go first? Angela, I see you reaching for the unmute. Did it happen? There you go. Hi.
I will unmute. So if we are still talking about Stan and Ute's treatment, all that I can say, I know what it feels like to be paralyzed in fear, and I know what it is to be like over, just everything's like heightened and you just like panic. I've been both ways, and I've never reached out literally for help. I've never reached out for help. I don't know. I just didn't trust anyone. So to see all of these therapies that are available, I'm like, I had no idea. I really had no idea. My therapy was my dog. I mean, my dog was my protection. She was like my force field. And to see now that I could have reached out for help and I could have unstuck out of that frozen mode or calmed down all that hypersensitivity. It's like, oh my God, it was there the whole time and no one ever told me. I never looked for help. I never even told anyone that I needed help. I just lived silently. I suffered silently my entire life. So now that I'm in my 50s, it's like, I've got to figure this out. I've got to find what's holding me back, what's keeping the fear so just alive in me. So just reading this book and, reading like other Holocaust survivors books, I'm discovering, I can, overcome this with help from other people. I can trust someone to really show me how to walk out of this. So I don't know what to say, what's the best treatment for them, but I just know for myself, I've been there and it sucks. It really sucks. So this is good. This is why I'm taking this book club, because I really want to understand this. I don't want to keep trying to figure it out on my own. So I don't know. I don't have really any technical stuff to add. I just know what it feels like.
That is absolutely okay. Your lived experience, I could listen to you talk about your lived experience more than I could read a textbook on trauma. Trust me on that. Okay. What's your dog's name?
She's Abby. She's a little Morky, and she passed away. And I literally thought I was going to lose my mind.
Well, we hold space for Abby.
When you hold on to something like that, in your mind, she's a therapy dog. In the family's mind, oh, she's just another pet. But you realize if I hold Abby, nobody gets near me because she growls at him. So now she's my protection. So when I'm fearful, I grab her and I was holding her. And that way nobody could reach out, towards me because she'd growl at him. And I was thinking, she's got my back. She's here. And she sits at my feet. She alerts me if there's something that I need to be, noticing. So when she passed away, I was like, I can't do this. So do I trust myself to figure this out without getting another dog? That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Angela, for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. I appreciate it so much. And it's a huge contribution to the discussion from lived experience. Huge. I know I said I was going to go to Zita, but I saw Karen's hand up. So I'm just going to go real quick to Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm also lived experience. So I lived in foster care for many years and had a lot of abuse there. And I definitely relate to Stan more than you. And I struggle with the yoga, the breathing, that I fight against all of that with every atom in my system. I do the opposite. I am an adrenaline junkie. I, go fast, go hard, all of that. I would love to. And I've, read Bessel's book a couple of times now. It was incredibly helpful to me because I am the person that has to understand it in order to get past it. And I didn't have any support, growing up with any of the trauma I went through. But I really appreciate all the comments here because things like sound bowls and all of that kind of stuff. I really think some of that might help me, but I would love it if someone can tell me how you switch into the calm part, the yoga part, the breathing part is something I've never, ever been able to do. So I thought I'd just mention that if anyone else has been turned into an adrenaline junkie over trauma, because that's what's happened to me.
Yes, I'll say, just speaking for me, yes, I can raise my hand to that. There's a guy by the name of Locke Kelly who has these meditations, but they're more fluid. They're more of like this movement sort of meditation. So I know for me, Locke Kelly's work has helped me and other survivors, trauma survivors I know that have sort of a hard time with that sort of stand still, sort of breathing in still meditation. I do practice mindful self-compassion, but his work is really profound in that area. So that's an area you might want to check out. So that we have some time, so we can continue on with Christine. Christine, what? Yeah, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I was going to contribute something else until Karen just put that out there, though. So I'd like to answer you, Karen, with my own experience. I've been hard and heavy healing in recovery for 15 years now, and was major dissociated. I don't think I was in my body. I'm 49 years old, and I'm just now getting connected to my body. I call it a superpower now, because it really did help me survive through a lot of stuff. And it was hypnotherapy and IFS that were profound techniques for me, to the point that I became trained in them and now offer that service. I took that route instead of getting licensed as a therapist after my graduate degree, because it just worked profoundly for me, to the point that I could heal parts of me especially through IFS was major, and to the point that then I was able to connect with my body, and now I'm loving yoga and breath work. But for just the same as you, for a decade, I really wanted to do yoga. I wanted to, and then I would drive to the building and then not go in. I just couldn't. I couldn't sit still. It was just way too scary. So keep going. You're doing really, really good, and it's just one step at a time.
Yeah, I even found myself when I was trying to do yoga, I was like, I'm going to do the hot yoga. Like I needed this challenge, I was so I even tried that. And that was sort of my introduction into getting into doing that. I don't practice currently, but I have. And it was just interesting. This discussion reminded me that, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go all in, and I needed the challenge of the 100-degree heat or whatever it is in the temperature. So that's just really interesting. Thanks so much, Christine, for commenting. Carol, I see your hand next.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that Van der Kolk says in the book somewhere early on, I think, is that trauma robs people of their ability to feel safe in their own bodies.
Yeah.
For me, that was a really important insight on multiple levels. And it reminded me that sometimes various sorts of individuals want people to do things that they believe are helpful, and there's actual chastising and shaming when you can't do it. So I've never been able to meditate. I would rather walk off a plank in the middle of the ocean on a tall ship. But And lots of really interesting shaming went on around that. But what I found on my own was that I can work with horses, and I have a master teacher down in the States I work with, and I can journey with them, which is a form of meditation, but it's okay. It works for me. And I think when people are trying to find ways to help people, it's not, as you've all said, a one size fits all. It's helping them be curious enough and safe enough to explore. Because if you had told me 20 years ago that I would journey, I would have had very unpleasant things to say to you about what kind of a practice that was. But for me and for others that I know, there's something about working with large animals that don't expect anything from you except mutual respect and decency, and who have these ginormous nervous systems that really can help you, that you can co-regulate with. And so they're masterful teachers. And I know that there's been a lot of work with veterans and both dogs and horses, but I think there's so many more applications for not just animal-based approaches to self-development and healing, but to just anything. I think people have to find their own place where they can feel safe inside their body. And I'm not sure we always respect how big a deal that being safe inside. It's really not a very nice place when you don't feel safe inside your body. And I suspect that many people don't even know they don't feel safe. People get into a reactivity thing. So I don't know if those are useful comments, but I probably will never forgive the people who said that I had to meditate. I don't know why you'd think somebody had to meditate. For some people, it works really effectively, and for others, it's a more challenging practice. So anyway, I would highly recommend equine facilitated self-development, healing, and therapy if you could find the right facilitator to guide you in terms of safety with the horses.
Thank you, Carol. All of your contributions add value. So please know that everything, whether it's an answer to the question, whether it's a share of your vulnerable story, whether it's a thought that you're having, this is a discussion and a book club. And so all of it matters and all of it is valuable. Yeah. Okay, so I'll pass it back over to Ronnie. I know we have some YouTube comments and we want to keep moving, so we'll go over to the next question as well. So Ronnie, I was just going to suggest maybe you can just add some of the YouTube comments in and then go ahead and take the next question.
Yeah, thank you, Asha.
You're welcome.
I was listening to the conversation, and I actually was thinking about equine therapy, but it is also another thing I've heard about bovine therapy as well. You can't get anything bigger than a big cow, right? I mean, they just lay there and you put your head on their heart and that's the synchronicity that just kind of blows my mind out of the water. So wonderful on that. And just to say, there's even the comments that have been a tremendous outpouring of support for comments that were shared by Angela and her story about her dog. And a lot of people resonate with that, right? That resonates with a lot of people, rather. And there was even mention of a couple of organizations. And obviously, I don't know if these are, I'm not endorsing these organizations, but certainly Annie McRae did mention Therapy Dogs International and partners. And it's just really wonderful how other people have found the same experiences and the healing through their dogs. And so we'll continue to look at all the comments, but let's go to the next question. So in chapter 5, we have a question about a couple of very notable practitioners over the years, over the centuries even. And the question is, speak about, or actually it's a prompt, not a question. It's speak about the connections between Darwin, Pavlov, and Porter's theories and how our understanding of trauma has developed over time. It's a very overarching question that spans many centuries. Any thoughts about that? let's begin with Zita. Zita, I believe you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, technologically defunct. It was a hard one for me. I went back and I looked over. I'm much more familiar with Porges's work, but it brought me back to my early days in sociology at university, and introduction to René Descartes, right? And I think, therefore I am, and the whole kind of development of mind-body dualism, right? And where we really, as what I'm going to frame, very Eurocentric medicine, kind of evolved a lot on this deep quest of the mind and the body being distinct as organisms, and how that didn't really permeate cultures in other areas of the world the same way. And it's evolved, and the outcomes of that is that we've evolved into very different practices in different parts of the world in terms of how we look at this mind-body connection, right? And so now we're kind of looking back and going, wow, there's a lot to this idea that we are, in fact, a mono organism as opposed to this dual archetype of mind versus body. And I loved that, that evolution harmoniously in terms of bringing us back to we are at our essence animals, right? We are at our essence mammals. We have these beautiful cognitive capacities, but we are ultimately always seeking to connect, to feel grounded, to feel safe, and to survive in a world that has gotten very, very complex at a rate that our nervous systems may not have quite caught up to. And so it's very interesting to look back in notes and look at Darwin and go, wow, we've really definitely come a long way. And yet the roots and the seeds have been there the whole time. We just failed to connect the dots, I think, in large part because we were looking at very top focused processes.
Yeah, certainly we kind of vacillate between the two sides of this sometimes. Right? Over the years, we're either very down or very bottom up. And we're seeing the pendulum swing to the other side a little bit these days. But a lot of us, I mean, for instance, I've seen those videos, and maybe some of the people in the audience have seen these as well. Feel free to comment in the YouTube channel. But Peter Levine and his videos about like the animals, like the polar bear getting shot, and just seeing how he shakes it off. You don't see traumatized polar bears in the wild. You don't see, deer and antelope just, not going about their business, even though they've been pursued and chased in these life-threatening situations. So a lot that we can learn from the fellow creatures on this earth. Let's get some more feedback and comments. Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
The power of perception is just amazing. So like Bessel wrote in the book with the dogs, the experiment that they did with the electrical shock, and even when the door was open on the cage, the dog still wouldn't leave the cage because it had the perception from the beliefs formed through the physiology of the original trauma that it couldn't leave the cage. So it stopped trying to get out of the comfort zone. And humans do the same thing, especially when traumatized in childhood. We form the perception, those beliefs based on the trauma. And then even though it doesn't apply to life, as life goes on, it doesn't apply, but then there's still, this is where IFS comes in, like there's still parts of us that are trapped in that negative feedback loop, stuck back in those earlier times when the perception, when the beliefs were originally formulated. So it's just, it's amazing how it keeps us stuck in that comfort zone, even though it's painful. We still don't realize that we can just step out of that door of that cage, just like in that experiment in the book.
Yeah, I think that the classical conditioning that Pavlov presented with the stimulus being so overriding that it becomes a learned helplessness. And that is very dangerous, not only for animals, but obviously for all of us. Something that we can certainly take away and live free in the freedom that we've been given, even though we don't always feel that way. Anna Radhika, how about you? What are your thoughts about the theories over the centuries?
So for me, just a little off topic, I just think that Charles Darwin, with his survival of the fittest, was really originated trauma for us. Capitalism, trauma. I just think, that whole idea that, yes, you got to fight to survive, and it's like dog eat dog. I think when I was rereading some of his works, it was like, wow, we have really embodied that idea. And, some of these ideas that have been given to us that we've just taken in and not really thought about are just fascinating, because they do live in our bodies, and we've taken it in, and it's not just a belief system, it's actually a truth for us. And I think that's where it becomes really necessary to start really working on the social interactions and the compassion and the empathy and the love, and really, starting to say, okay, where can we deconstruct this idea of it's a dog eat dog world, or no pain, no gain, or, all these things that we were brought up with. We need to shift. We need to do like a complete paradigm shift into a different perspective. And it's also interesting, because I feel like, again, a little bit off, but still related to the subject, is the idea that all the traumas we're talking about in this book so far have been, capital T traumas, the big traumas. But at the same time, we have daily traumas that are just causing us not to live our lives fully. Whether it's like social media telling us we're not good enough or smart enough or beautiful enough, or, not able to go and afford these beautiful vacations, or it's just not being acknowledged at work. Somebody else gets the credit for what you're doing, because everybody's trying to get ahead. Like everybody's trying to, it's like, it's me. And, and I think that what I really liked about Borges' stuff is that it's really about, we're not separate. We are all connected. What happens to you affects me. And so how can I make sure you're okay and I'm okay? And it's not, taking responsibility where it's not wrong response, it's the right responsibility. So if I'm regulated and I'm clear and I'm calm and I'm centered, then I have the space for you to be the same, right? And it's like, it's on a daily basis. I feel like the daily traumas also just build up without us even noticing. And we give all our attention to the big traumas. It's like, oh, I can't say anything because I haven't had this major thing happen in my life. No, everything is major. Everything that happens to you that disrupts your harmony or your alignment is major. It may not look like that to somebody else, but it is to you. And I think we really need to start taking more care of our own selves and our own, in a very self-love way, as opposed to like, oh, me again. It's like, no, how do we fit into this great? That's what I love about Borges' work. It's like, how do we fit into this greater world? Like, what can I do to make it better, safer for me, for others? Yeah.
I love that concept, because even from my own culture, we certainly believe that we are, one member of the overall body. And so if we're talking about somatic interventions or body-based treatments, how can each one of us be one member that supports and encourages the other members of the body? So you can rejoice when others rejoice, suffer that you also suffer. And it's something that's felt very deeply and throughout the entire community. The entire body comes together for a reason. And when we're thinking about animals, and even what Darwin would say, you look at not just how you respond, as I was saying before about Peter Levine, those videos on the polar bear shaking it off, right? But also about when you have a group of animals in a pack, maybe deer drinking by the river, and you hear a snap of a twig, one ear goes up, they all go up, and they're all, I think they do better than those synchronized swimmers in the Olympics. I mean, they're just amazing. And how do we get back to that? How do we have synchronicity? It's a very big question.
I think too, just jumping in again, I think too, it's just super interesting when you were talking about culturally. I feel like even for me culturally, you know, the Western philosophy and psychology kind of took us away from that idea of family, right? It was like, oh, that was not acceptable at the time. And it's just beautiful to see how we're coming back around full circle to those olden ways of really connecting and really feeling together. Yeah,
The isolation that is caused by the suffering of the world. As you mentioned before, it's not just the quote unquote big T traumas. Dr. Kolk and a lot of others have been pushing for complex developmental trauma as a proper diagnosis, right? And that's actually what is causing a lot of problems in the fabric of society. It's just tearing at the seams because the family unit itself has been torn asunder in a lot of different ways. And a lot of the work that I do with groups, starts with the psychoeducation, understand what trauma is, the components of grief, and moving to skills development where it's not just the top down, but also the somatic interventions bottom up. And then finally, really about interpersonal processing, those process groups where you might not have a family, you might have been raised in a foster home, you might have, been through the juvenile delinquent system, right? And going through all foster care, all of that, how can you actually have fictive kinship? How do you have people who are not your biological family, but actually people who have raised you or who have been there for maybe a few years in your life, and it was only that, but it was the most you've ever had. So a lot of work we can do for trauma survivors and in the group setting. So let me go for one more comment here. Carol, let's hear your comments about the different theories.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Darwin. I'm not sure if we misinterpreted or overinterpreted or just emphasized his survival of the fittest mantra, but there was a little known Russian prince who came partly contemporaneously with Darwin, and he was interested in Darwin. He did a lot of field work, and he wrote a book or two about mutual aid. And it's just his way of saying the survival of a species is about its ability to support each other and have connection and community. And he was looking at that in the animal world, but it transfers really nicely to people. It's really connected to Van der Kolk and others' ideas about the critical importance of social connectedness. And that's, of course, critically connected to Porges' polyvagal work and the importance of engaging that ventral vagal system and how other systems like the dorsal vagal one override it sometimes. So it's curious to me that if our survival is, or at least our healthy survival is dependent on these sorts of social connectedness things, that we have managed to get ourselves, and the animals haven't, but we have gotten ourselves into we're an animal too, but our particular species has gotten ourselves into this conundrum of disconnection and isolation and siloing, and not just about the breakup of the nuclear family, but it's everywhere in our society. And it raises really interesting questions for me about collectively as a species, how we're going to dig ourselves out of this, because and maybe we're dug into it so hard because trauma is if not the major public health issue in probably most countries. And every time I see a war break out, I think, oh, here we go again. There's another generation or two of people that are going to be so profoundly traumatized that they can't kind of self-actualize in the way that we hope our species does generation upon generation. So it's not really a solution issue. I see all these things as really connected. I don't know what solutions are, except that we have to keep at it or we're going to get in worse conundrums than we're in now. And we're doing things to isolate ourselves more when that's the thing we most need is less isolation and more connection.
Yeah, definitely have to figure out this isolation piece, and it comes back to what I and Anuradhika was saying, is that how do we as a society actually go to what works instead of just what we want to work, right? And in the American culture, I mean, we all love our country, but the thing is, we haven't really solved the health crisis in terms of anxiety and depression, and all of those are in an upswing. And you see how the other countries, the other regions around the world, they're much more collectivistic. They're not individualistic. They actually have a history and a culture where all those family units come together, and it's not just biological, but just their neighbors. They look out for each other in a way that we don't really do that in our urban environments. And so looking more towards developing our social engagement systems, a la Porges, it's very critical to any kind of solution in the future. I do see a really great comment in our chat by one of our panelists. I don't know if she can unmute herself. Tracy, you had this wonderful comment in a chat. I don't know if your unmute is working now, it looks like.
It's working now, thank you.
All right, why don't you share?
Sure. The comment that I had, I mean, in reading Bessel's book, and I've had it forever, is not only is there a fortunate psychoeducational component to it, but he describes the parts of the brain that are responsible for what we now know they are responsible for. But in addition to that, what he does is he subscribes the language of how to heal. I'm in the United States of America, and I find that our particular Western medicine teaches a certain way. It teaches very differently than it does Eastern medicine or other philosophies. And fortunately or unfortunately, or a combination of both, we only know what we know. So what we see as familiar becomes familiar to us, and it might be very limiting. So, my comment was, in order for the mind to heal, this is Bessel's position, and I fully support it. In order for the mind to heal, we must engage our body as well. I made reference to that's the necessity in part to the bottom-up approach. There are just different things to do to engage different parts of the brain to allow us to heal. And we would ask ourselves, well, why? Why do different things work for different people? And there's lots of reasons. It's what's the capacity of what part of that person's brain, and where were they traumatized, and where do we need to lock or unlock the parts of the conscious or unconsciousness that need to be available to essentially integrate what healing really looks like. So traditional therapies, CBT and whatnot, although they are, evidence-based, and we probably have lots of language to talk about what that really means and doesn't mean, although they've traditionally worked, it doesn't mean that it will work for whatever is important right here and right now. It might also work for planting the seed. It might not address what's happening, underneath. I think the sooner that the medical community, right, our doctors, our psychiatrists, our psychologists look toward integrative healing, I think, we have a lot of room to grow. I think that the message has to be demonstrated out loud and in all environments for us to even be permitted to understand that there are alternate ways to heal. Oftentimes if we hear the word alternative treatment, we think, oh, who's that? What are we going to do that for? And it's almost as if there's an outcast to it instead of it being a beautiful integration of healing. And I think it plays a lot into how our system is set up. Doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs spend a lot of time formulating a diagnosis, right? It's so important to have an accurate diagnosis. And while I don't dispute that, there's so much time set aside for that. The focus has not really, in my mind, after decades of doing this, has not been on how do we include better interventions? How do we expand what's available for people so they can heal? It's almost as if the focus is, let's get the diagnosis right, stop there. How do we get the treatments right? Because that's how we really get the people to heal. And that's what this is all about anyway. So.
Thank you for that, Tracy. I can see you've been holding all this energy this entire time, and we're just blessed to be able to hear all of your wisdom and insight there. I couldn't agree more. I think that a lot of the things that we've done is really describing the problem really well. But this prescription part is what should move the needle. And Bessel talks a lot about, I don't know if it's okay for me to share, but I mean, he shared a lot in the traumatic stress studies program and other venues about how he was even treating somebody for a long time, for years. And then he just brought her somewhere, and that person just helped her to unlock all the traumas with a single movement of the hand. She just needs to reach out and pushing the attacker away that had attacked her years and years ago. And that began the catharsis process. So it's really amazing how our bodies are integrated. And yet at the same time, every time we hear anything about alternative medicine or treatment approaches, it seems to be coming from another region of the world. And holistic is not something we use in terms of describing our own treatments, which is unfortunate. Atra, I see a lot of comments in the YouTube. I don't know if you've kind of picked through some of them and want to share.
Yeah, and then I'm just going to jump right over into chapter 6, question 1, since we're talking about treatment modalities that are currently addressing trauma. I think that piggybacks right off, so because we don't have much time left. But I did want to just comment. We've got, I love this. We're so wrapped up in the story of theories and information as a practice that we can't tend to the basic physiology of discharging a spike in energy, resisting the natural ebb and flow of energy. And that was from Naturally Adrian. I agree. Jenny says, yes, I see that daily ongoing trauma as a teacher in schools all the time as children are driven to compete in their learning with the other students. So, and then Denise mentions about the mammals responding to the environment and how we use, have animals, pets, horses, and so forth that we can co-regulate with as a modality to help us deal with trauma. So just going on to question, chapter 6, question 1, just really piggybacking off of what we're talking about. What did the studies discussed in this chapter tell us about our current approach to the treatment of trauma? Vita, I see your hand. I saw that go up quick. Let's get it, girl. What is it? Let's do it. Talk about the current treatments.
One of the things I was so drawn to about this panel and this approach to the book club is that you were specifically looking for an intersectional experience, not just from holding different locations biopsychosocially, but different career types, different things like that, really looking for a broader perspective. I'll tell you that, so I do a lot of work in trauma-informed fitness and trauma-informed exercise prescription, and how we manage the body and teach the body to tolerate stress. And I went through a period of great frustration that I, as a personal trainer, was having to bring this information forward and going like, where are the doctors who know this? Where is the prescription for this? We tell people, go and meditate, go do yoga, go do exercise as medicine, but there's a very, very significant stopgap of knowledge, and that creates these huge barriers of accessibility, right? There are real physical and physiological and psychological reasons why meditation might not be the right strategy for Carol, right? And that gets to be 100% valid. But when we offer only one resource, we often lead to a situation where people, if that doesn't work, actually wind up feeling less safe because they came to us looking for answers, and we wind up oftentimes creating this situation where we go, well, this is the only answer available, instead of incorporating our own internal curiosity and saying, right, there are so many ways of approaching the body. The brain is undiscovered country in terms of what we're learning every single day. This is an exciting adventure of self-exploration, right? Interoception doesn't have to start with, how did that experience make you feel? It can start with, can we remember what it feels like to feel full? When's the last time you felt thirsty? Can we connect with the sensation of air conditioning, right? Like we can go back to things that are rooted in these same principles and not necessarily have to immerse ourselves all the time into these very hard things while still engaging in healing. And I think that that's a lot of the work that Porges does do in terms of saying, like, can we lean into establishing safety without having to continuously re-traumatize the system? And for those who are really interested in that question, one thing that is not, I think, talked about enough, and Bessel touches on it in so many kind of back end ways, but post-traumatic growth, right? This is the future. How do we engage in resilience? How do we engage in taking these hard experiences and capitalizing on them? So, yeah.
Thank you, Zita. Yeah, post-traumatic growth, we discussed it a little bit last week too. So that is a big thing that, that just even, I hear post-traumatic growth and I automatically think Deb Dana talks about, the ventral vagal, like cues of safety and cues of danger so we can get there, and her ladder. And I think about that. That's, to me, that's growth. That's that post-traumatic growth of helping people sort of get into that ventral vagal state. Not that we're, stay there, but the navigation, right, between our emotions of when we feel that sympathetic energy versus the parasympathetic energy, and the navigation through that all. Anna Radhika, I see your hand too.
Just really quick, because I know we're running out of time, but I think that we need to also just develop vocabulary around these things, and just common vocabulary. I think we need to start working with children at a much younger age, like helping them find, what does safety mean, right? It means different things to different people at different times, but how do you find that safety internally, external, especially if it's not external, at least internally? How do I feel safe in my own body? I think vocabulary is really important. I feel empowerment is really important. I mean, it broke my heart hearing Angela saying she didn't have anybody to reach out to. I mean, it just really broke my heart. And I'm like, we're here. We should be here. And just teaching children, I think, like, where is it safe to go and ask for help? It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not feel guilty because the trauma's not big. Anything you feel, it's trauma. Anything that can, that is taking you away is, and just help them find resourcing, internal resourcing, external resourcing. And I think that's just, we have to really, really start at a much younger age than we do. By the time you reach trauma and dealing with trauma as an adult, you've already lost so many years, and I just think it's really, really important. I mean, just things like the arts in schools, don't take that away. That's time for children to feel safe. Reset. It's like, yeah, let's just try and even bring into school day. What are times when they can feel safe? Not one answer for everybody. So how many different things can we bring in? Let them find it. And just really give them empowerment, give them that resourcing, give them that safety, because without safety, like, everything is up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I recently, I think I shared last week, I tore my labrum, and I didn't know this. It was an unexpected thing. And the doctor had said, do you want me to give you something to make you feel better? And I was like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I've read some John Hopkins studies and so forth. And it was this, like, she didn't validate my no. no, right? She didn't sort of respect my no. It was still this, and not to say that medication doesn't have its purpose, but for me as the patient, right? For me as the patient, my voice and choice is important, and our voice and choice is important. And so to have someone validate that someone sort of has that sort of power over, or as we see it, especially for trauma survivors, right? That sort of authority or person that's supposed to be our caregiver, that can be a re-traumatizing experience if they don't respect our no, or don't attune to, maybe some of the other holistic modalities that we may be trying in our life, and not be so dismissive of it necessarily. But, oh, really? Well, tell me more about, there's a lack of attunement there that I see that we could definitely use as trauma survivors and healing, and healing people who have just really suffered for a really, really long time. Yeah, I agree.
And I love your idea of choice and consent.
Yeah, consent is a big thing. I like to say that's one of the C's. It's out of the self of modality of internal family systems, but consent definitely is one of the C's that I like. That's not necessarily part of the 8, but boy, is it important. It is so important. Absolutely. I know we're low on time, so I just wanted to hand it over to Ronnie. But before I do, there was some questions or comments in the YouTube chat. So before I guess you go into your last question, Ronnie, did you want to provide us some comments from YouTube on this question itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I just love the interaction we're getting from the YouTube channel. There's a whole host of comments and even questions there. So definitely take a look at that. I'll read one of them that really jumped out at me. Andrea actually spoke about a little bit of attunement that you mentioned. She says, Andrea says, I had a session of the Alexander technique, which was so refreshing as it was human attention / listening without all these assessment questions and note taking. I know from other therapies. And so, yes, Andrea, completely agree. Sometimes a client could come in and you're just throwing question upon questions, and it's just like fill out the form, doing the checkbox, the checklist, and ticking the checkboxes. It doesn't really build a connection. And we all know that the counselor-counselee relationship is a major factor to success, therapeutic progress. So with that, let me bring up the last question of today. Chapter 6, question 2. The question is, how might we help individuals to independently recognize experiences of loss, of self-awareness and depersonalization without access to medical technology, i.e. brain scans? So let's open this up. Alyssa, how would you help these individuals?
So one of the practices I've recently been introduced to, at least under this nomenclature, is a personal profile map. And it kind of takes that, both the top down and the bottom up, and creates what I've actually done with my children before, and they call it a frustration fill up. And basically, using colored markers and stuff, you focus on each of the 3 states of your nervous system, that ventral vagal, the safety. What color is that for you? The sympathetic, the mobilized fight or flight, and then that dorsal vagal, which is the immobilization. And then you start with the sympathetic, move to the dorsal for this activity, and then to the vagal, just because it's a natural progression for us to go from that sympathetic to the dorsal. It's familiar, that pathway. And then through the process, you kind of re-ground yourself with what it feels like when you're in your vagal state. But basically, within each state, you really just kind of start to break down, what does each state look like for you? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What's happening in your body? What do you do in that state? What do you feel? What do you think and say? And it's kind of just getting this measure that you can begin to tune into, like, oh, I'm starting to sweat. Oh, my heart rate's starting to, accelerate. I'm getting really irritable with, my short clipped answers to my kids. Like, I'm starting to enter my parasympathetic. And I found that even just that brings that awareness And it may evolve over time too. At first, with someone dissociated, you may not be, I don't know what that looks like. Or you may only be able to think, well, I explode and then I feel guilty and this and that. Like, but over time, even just that awareness, that grows. And then you can add to your list. And again, just that awareness, bringing it back to how I feel and so on.
Wow, what a wonderful way to close out this panel discussion today, Alyssa. It's inspiring because actually with the Trauma Research Foundation, we also have a neurofeedback certificate program. So how do we actually think about that, but do it old school, right? I mean, can I sing a song with my daughter and we're in tune, we're in sync, and we're not, messing up the beats, we're not out of breath. What are the ways that we can actually do this if we were in a car going on a road trip, right? So definitely a lot of good thoughts. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today for another wonderful book club. I'm going to hand it over to Emma for her to close this out. But thank you again for all the panelists as well as those who have participated through the YouTube channel.
All right, everyone. And this brings us to a close of our discussion today. Thank you all for being with us today. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for being a part of the TRF community. And we hope that you'll join us for the remaining sessions as we continue to discuss The Body Keeps the Score. We will meet again next week, Thursday, March 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern for our third episode to discuss Part 3, The Minds of Children, chapters 7 through 10. Everyone registered for book club will receive an email with next week's YouTube link, and you can also find that information when you log into your TRF members account. If you're interested in applying to be a panelist and being up on the virtual stage like our wonderful panelists today, please fill out the questionnaire that has been dropped into the chat. You will also find this in your next book club email and in your TRF members account. Participation in the panel enrolls you to be selected for the final panel with Bessel van der Kolk on March 30th. I would like to share, before we go, I would like to share about 3 exciting upcoming events at the Foundation. So one, for the 34th year, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and TRF will host the annual Boston International Trauma Conference, bringing together one of the world's most innovative leaders from the field of trauma, attachment, neuroscience, mindfulness, body-oriented work, and psychedelic studies. This live, virtual, and in-person event will take place May 17th through 20th, 2023. Tickets are on sale now with special early bird prices available until April 19th, and we encourage you to register today for this incredible conference. Also, the Traumatic Stress Studies Certificate Program launched earlier this week on February 27th. However, you're welcome to continue to look into enrollment. Our intensive postgraduate level certificate program consists of 32 weeks of immersion into the fundamental issues necessary to become an expert clinician treating adults and children who suffer from traumatic stress. This is a self-paced online course with monthly live virtual Q&As with experts in the field of trauma, including Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Lastly, our trauma-informed neurofeedback certificate program, as Ronnie mentioned, will launch its spring cohort on March 20th. The Trauma Research Foundation recognizes neurofeedback as one of the tools that can help to rewire a physiological system that has become dysregulated as a result of trauma. We invite licensed mental health or medical professionals to explore this high-level comprehensive certification. Please check out our website to learn more about these events. Again, thank you to our panelists, new and returning. Thank you to our great moderators, Atra Tarfa and Ronnie Ang. And thank you to the TRF team who are all making this book club happen. We'd love to hear about your experience. Feel free to reach out and share any feedback you have with us at our email programs@traumaresearchfoundation.org. Thank you, Ronnie and Atra, for guiding us through today's session.